They say life is a series of choices, a web spun from the threads of morality, desires, and moments we never anticipate. My name is Helena, and I used to believe I had my life meticulously planned. I married a kind and stable man, Robert, a widower with a teenage son, Daniel. At 42, I thought I had outgrown the chaos of youthful indiscretions, but nothing prepares you for the unpredictability of human connections, especially when they're forbidden. This is not a story of what happened, but of what nearly did. A story of tension, of lingering gazes, and of the strange, electric pull between two people who should have remained nothing more than family. Daniel came into my life when he was 19, handsome, brooding, and startlingly aware of his own magnetism. I thought my role as his stepmother would be simple: guidance, respect, and a clear boundary of propriety. What I didn't anticipate was the way his mere presence could disrupt the steady rhythm of my existence. I didn't expect him to ignite feelings I couldn't name, let alone control. As I recount this story, I do so with a heart burdened by shame and relief. Nothing truly happened between Daniel and me, but the almosts, the fleeting touches, the tension-filled silences, will forever haunt me. Let this be a confession of the lines we almost crossed and the lessons I've painfully learned about temptation and restraint. The first time I met Daniel, I was struck by how much he resembled his father. Same piercing blue eyes, same confident posture. But while Robert's demeanor was calm and steady, Daniel's had a reckless edge. He entered our home with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and an air of indifference that immediately piqued my curiosity. "Helena, this is Daniel," Robert said, beaming with pride. I extended my hand, expecting a quick, perfunctory handshake. Instead, Daniel's hand lingered in mine just a fraction longer than necessary. His grip was firm, his gaze unwavering. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, one I quickly dismissed as nerves. Over dinner, Daniel's charm was undeniable. He was articulate, witty, and had a way of making everyone feel as though they were the center of his world. Robert basked in the glow of his son's attention, and I found myself laughing at Daniel's jokes, feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't until later, as I cleaned up in the kitchen, that I realized how much space Daniel already occupied in my mind. His voice echoed in my thoughts, his laugh replayed like a favorite song. I chastised myself for being ridiculous. He was my stepson, after all. Over the following weeks, Daniel settled into the house. He was in his second year of college, studying architecture, and spent most of his time in his room sketching or playing guitar. I found myself drawn to the sound of his music, lingering near his door longer than I should. The first moment of real tension came one rainy afternoon. I was in the living room reading when Daniel walked in, his hair damp from the rain. He wore a plain white t-shirt that clung to his torso, and I couldn't help but notice how much he had filled out. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was undeniably a man. "You're staring," he said, a teasing smirk playing on his lips. I flushed, immediately averting my gaze. I wasn't staring. I was just thinking. "About what?" he asked, his tone playful yet probing. "Nothing important," I replied quickly, my voice higher than usual. But the way his eyes lingered on mine told me he didn't believe me. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. As I opened the refrigerator, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, shirtless, his sweatpants hanging low on his hips. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low and rough from sleep. I nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of how exposed I felt in my thin nightgown. "Just needed some water." He walked past me, his arm brushing mine. The contact was fleeting but electric. I held my breath, willing my heart to slow down. He reached for a glass and turned to face me, leaning casually against the counter. "You look different," he said, his eyes scanning me in a way that felt both flattering and dangerous. "It's late," I replied, deflecting. "We should both get some rest." He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if trying to read my thoughts. "You're interesting, Helena," he said softly. "More interesting than you let on." Before I could respond, He walked away, leaving me to grapple with the implications of his words. The days blurred into weeks, each one filled with moments that felt too significant to ignore. One evening, after Robert had gone to bed, Daniel and I found ourselves alone in the living room. We were watching a movie, the kind of mindless action film that didn't require much attention. At some point, our hands brushed as we reached for the bowl of popcorn. I pulled mine back instinctively, but Daniel didn't move his. Instead, he turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Helena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever feel like—" He trailed off, and for a moment, the air between us crackled with unspoken words. He leaned in slightly, his face inches from mine. My breath hitched, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he might kiss me. But then, as if a spell had been broken, I stood abruptly. "I should go to bed," I said, my voice trembling. Without waiting for his response, I fled to my room, my heart pounding. The tension between us reached its peak one afternoon, when we were alone in the house. But even then, as the boundaries blurred and the temptation grew unbearable, we stopped short of crossing the line. The rest of the story chronicles the unraveling of this delicate balance, the confrontations, and the choices that ultimately defined our relationship. The tension between Daniel and me had been simmering for weeks, a steady undercurrent beneath the daily routine of our lives. I told myself it was harmless, that fleeting glances and stolen moments didn't mean anything. But I knew I was lying. One afternoon, the house was empty except for the two of us, and that fragile equilibrium came dangerously close to shattering. It was a warm Saturday, and Robert had gone to play golf with friends. Daniel was outside washing his car, the sunlight glinting off his bare shoulders. I tried to distract myself with chores, folding laundry in the living room, but every time I glanced out the window, I found my gaze lingering on him. "Helena," his voice startled me. I hadn't heard him come inside. He stood in the doorway, a towel slung over his shoulder, water dripping from his hair. His shirt was gone, revealing a lean, sculpted torso. I looked away quickly, focusing intently on the pile of clothes in front of me. "Yes," I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "I could use some help," he said. His tone was casual, but there was something in his eyes, a challenge maybe, or curiosity. "The wax isn't coming off evenly." I hesitated, knowing it would be better to decline. But before I could think of a polite excuse, he added, "It's just a car, Helena. Not a big deal." So I followed him outside, determined to keep things light and impersonal. He handed me a cloth, and we worked side by side in silence. The air was thick with heat, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. At one point, he reached over to adjust my grip on the cloth. His hand covered mine, warm and firm, and I froze. "Like this," he said softly, his breath brushing against my ear. My heart raced, and for a moment, I couldn't move. When I finally pulled my hand away, I laughed nervously. "I think you've got this under control," I said, stepping back. But even as I walked away, I could feel his eyes on me. That evening, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I cooked dinner, chatted with Robert, and avoided being alone with Daniel. But he wasn't making it easy. He kept finding reasons to be near me, reaching past me for a dish, brushing against me as he walked by. Each touch, each glance, was a reminder of the growing tension between us. After dinner, as Robert settled in front of the TV, Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. "Helena," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said quickly, keeping my eyes on the sink. "Yes, there is." He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're not imagining this. I know you feel it too." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "Daniel, whatever this is, it's not right." "Why not?" he asked, his tone defiant. "We're not related. We're two adults. You're my stepson," I said firmly. "And I'm married to your father. That's all that matters." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then he sighed and stepped back. "Fine," he said. "But don't pretend you don't feel it, Helena. because I know you do. After that confrontation, things changed. I avoided being alone with Daniel as much as possible. I threw myself into my work, joined a book club, and even started volunteering at a local shelter, anything to keep myself busy and out of the house. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the memories of those moments we had shared. One evening, I came home to find Daniel sitting on the porch, his guitar resting on his lap. He was playing a soft, melancholy tune, and I couldn't help but stop and listen. When he saw me, he smiled, a small, hesitant smile that felt like an olive branch.
"Hey," he said.
I wrote something. Want to hear it? I hesitated, but finally nodded. He played a few chords, and then his voice filled the air, low and haunting. The lyrics spoke of longing, of forbidden desires, and of the struggle to let go. By the time he finished, my throat was tight with emotion. "That was beautiful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks," he said, looking up at me. "It's about complicated feelings." I didn't respond.
I didn't trust myself to.
As careful as I tried to be, Robert began to notice the tension between Daniel and me. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, he turned to me and said, "You and Daniel seem off lately. Is everything okay?" "Yes, of course," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know," he said, frowning. "You seem distant, and he's been acting strange. I just want to make sure everything's all right." "It's fine," I said, placing my hand on his.
"Really?"
But even as I said the words, I felt a pang of guilt. I was keeping secrets from my husband, and it was tearing me apart. The breaking point came one evening when Daniel and I found ourselves alone in the house again. He cornered me in the hallway, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and longing. "Helena, I can't do this anymore," he said. "I can't pretend I don't feel something for you." "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling. "We can't." "Why not?" he asked. "Because it's wrong." "Or because you're scared?" "Both," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "I care about you, Daniel. But this isn't love. It's something else. And it's not worth destroying our family over." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then he nodded, his expression filled with sadness. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I worked to rebuild the boundaries we had crossed. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. He threw himself into his studies, and I focused on my marriage, determined to make things right. Though the tension between us never fully disappeared, we both knew we had made the right choice. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And some temptations, no matter how strong, are better left unfulfilled. Even after Daniel and I agreed to step back, the echoes of what could have been lingered in unexpected moments. A casual exchange over breakfast, a shared glance during a family outing, or the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. These small things kept the memories alive, even though I desperately wished they wouldn't. One evening, I found myself alone in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner. The house was quiet. Robert had retired early, and Daniel was in his room. Or so I thought. "Helena," his voice came softly from behind me, startling me. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his expression unreadable. "I didn't hear you come down," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, stepping closer. "I've been thinking about us." "Daniel," I began, but he cut me off. "Just hear me out," he said, his eyes pleading. "I know we agreed to move on, and I've tried. But every time I see you, it's like it all comes rushing back. I don't know how to shut it off." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "You have to," I said quietly. "We both do. For Robert's sake. For the family's sake. This, whatever this is, it's not real. It's a distraction. A temptation. But it's not love." He looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing my words. "It feels real to me," he said finally. "It feels real because we've let it," I said gently. "But feelings aren't facts, Daniel. And the fact is, this can't happen. It won't happen." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment, "for making this harder on you. I'll try to do better." As he turned to leave, I felt a pang of sadness, a bittersweet ache that reminded me of all the things I would never say aloud. Before he could disappear down the hall, something inside me tingled, and I reached out for Daniel's arm, drew him back to me, and kissed him. I told myself it had been so long since Robert had paid me any attention or touched me. Daniel looked into my eyes and kissed me. I kissed him back, and we got intimate. After we were done, I felt a pang of guilt, but I tried my best to shake off the feeling. Over the next few days, whenever Robert was away, Daniel and I spent a lot of time together, whether our clothes were on or off. Daniel was strong and intense. He was a step up from his father. I enjoyed every moment I spent with him. A few weeks later, an old friend of Robert's came to visit. Her name was Sophia, a lively and charismatic woman who seemed to fill the house with her energy. She was beautiful in a way that turned heads, with sharp cheekbones and an easy laugh that drew people in. Sophia's presence was a welcome distraction. She charmed everyone, including Daniel, who seemed to brighten in her company. Watching him laugh and joke with her, I felt an odd mix of emotions: relief, jealousy, and something else I couldn't quite name. One evening, as we all sat in the living room, Sophia told a story that had us all laughing. Daniel sat next to her on the couch, his attention fully on her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in the room dissipate. Later, as I cleared the dishes, Sophia joined me in the kitchen. "You have a lovely family," she said, her smile warm. "Thank you," I said, returning her smile. "And Daniel," she added, her tone light. "He's quite the charmer, isn't he?" "He is," I agreed, though my voice faltered slightly. She glanced at me, her smile fading slightly. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," I said quickly, but her perceptive gaze lingered. Sophia's visit brought temporary relief, but it also stirred something within me, a desire to reclaim control of my emotions and my life. I realized I had been letting the situation with Daniel consume me, and it was time to take action. I began seeing a therapist, someone I could talk to openly about the confusion and guilt I had been carrying. It was terrifying at first, admitting the truth out loud, but it was also liberating. "It sounds like you've been carrying a heavy burden," my therapist said after I finished recounting the past few months. "I have," I admitted, "but I don't know how to let it go." "Forgiveness is a process," she said. "Forgiving yourself for being human, for feeling things you wish you didn't, and for making the choice to do what's right, even when it's hard." Her words stayed with me, and over the following weeks, I worked on letting go of the guilt, the tension, and the unspoken feelings that had been weighing me down. When Sophia left, the house felt quieter, but something had shifted. Daniel seemed more at ease, and our interactions became more natural, less charged. It was as though Sophia's presence had reminded him, and me, that there was a world beyond the tension we had created. One afternoon, Daniel approached me as I read on the patio. "I've decided to take an internship abroad," he said, his tone casual, but his expression serious. "Abroad?" I echoed, surprised. "Yeah," he said, sitting down across from me. "It's a great opportunity, and I think it's what I need right now. A fresh start." "That sounds wonderful," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm proud of you." A part of me was pained, a part of me was also relieved. At least I got to have my fun and keep my marriage in one. "Thanks," he said, his gaze meeting mine. "For everything. For understanding. And for putting up with me." I laughed softly, but there was a lump in my throat. "You're a good man, Daniel. Don't ever doubt that." With Daniel gone, the house felt emptier, but it was also a chance for Robert and me to reconnect. We began taking long walks together, cooking meals as a team, and rediscovering the bond that had brought us together in the first place. I also took the time to rediscover myself. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a yoga class and made new friends. And slowly, I began to feel like myself again, stronger, wiser, and more at peace. Looking back, I realized that the experience with Daniel had been a test, not just of my boundaries, but of my character. And while it had been one of the most challenging times of my life, it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of choosing love over temptation. Life, I learned, is not about avoiding storms, but about learning to dance in the rain.
If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos.